This paper is not about voodoo. Now, I'm going to give her a chance to do the paper over about voodoo. She didn't have one book written by a Haitian priest or priestess. She had not one book written by an African person. Not one of the books was about the subject of voodoo. It was all about witchcraft, because in her psyche, voodoo and witchcraft is synonymous. That is a word which is one of the most sacred words we have in some of our language system. In the airway system, in the Dogon system, the word connotes God and or it connotes the study of nature. Yet we see it in a defaming, derogatory context because our enemy put it in that context so that we would not deal with the science and the philosophy that is involved with that concept. And another word is Bantu. Y'all remember Bantu education? So Stephen Biko was fighting against Bantu education, Bantuization. And I too remember when I thought that was a bad word. But let's see if that's a bad word. And in this old book, Mantu, I hadn't read this thing in years, and then a few months ago I got into it. And the first thing I turned to was this. So I want to just read a little piece to you, because it's about a brother from Rwanda. You know, it's his philosophical perspective that's being focused on. His name is Kagame. In his exposition of the philosophy of the Bantu of Rwanda, Kagame starts from his mother tongue, Kinyarwanda. Like all Bantu language, it is a language of classification. That is, the substantive are not divided as they are in German into grammatical genders, but are grounded into kinds of classes. They are classes for human being, for things animated by magic, including trees, for tools, floods, animals, etc. The class of word can be recognized by a sound or a group of sounds which precedes the stem and which European grammarians call a prefix, but which Kagame, meaning the brother who's writing, with good reason, he calls it a determinative. For when a prefix like un, in unpleasant, or I am in impossible, is separated from the stem, meaningful words, pleasant or possible, remains. But in the Bantu language, on the other hand, the stem without the determinative does not give a word. The stem cannot stand alone, but lose all constant correctness and is in fact does not appear in speech. Meaning unless that whole word is used, part of it cannot be used. And this is what was so beautiful when I saw Mantu, which is a Rwandan word. It means human being. Mantu means human being. But the plural form of Mantu, the human beings, is Bantu. That's our word for people. But they took our word for people and demeaned it and made it derogatory, then made us demean it and made us see it as derogatory, so that we don't even want to be called Bantu because they've turned it into a negative. Because if you get into it, as this brother is getting into it, you see that within the context of these people, there is a whole philosophy on reality and on the world that ain't got nothing to do with white people. That defines realities for Africans from their perspective, based on their histology. That they have a view of the world that ain't got nothing to do with white people or any white experiences. There's 4 words here. In order to keep the concepts we are borrowing from King Game's mother tongue as simple and as easy to remember as possible, we shall suppress the tones as well as their true prefix, which in this language precede the determinative. So we get in simplified form 4 basic concepts, and that's what's important to look at, these 4 basic concepts. One is called Mantu. That means human beings. The plural form of that is Bantu. Number 2 is called Kintu. That means things. So now we've got humans, Mantu, things, Kintu, and the plural form of that is Bintu. Then the third is Hantu. place and time. And the fourth is kuntu, modality. So here's the language system that has in it a concept of human beings, both singular and plural, a concept of things, both singular and plural, a concept of place and time, and a concept of modality. But what's unique about the four words used for these four concepts is the NTU, the into at the end of all three. And if you take that into off, the words don't exist. And so what the brother is saying, that into represents, and I'll read it in his word, into is the universal force as such, which however never occurs apart from its manifestation. Mantu, kintu, hantu, and kuntu. Into is being itself, the cosmic universal force which only modern rationalizing thought can abstract from its manifestation. Into is that force in which being and beings coalesce. In short, what he's saying, within the context of this language is expressed the philosophy where the people do not separate themselves from the notion of God. That's the simplest way to put it. And that if we're talking about ideology, then we've got to talk about the fact that there is many African manifestation of ideological perspective within the context of traditional culture. I'll read you a couple of more definitions from the Yoruba context from this book Iyowa Pile, just to give you a concept of that. If we take, say, we always talk about Shango, but we rarely explain what Shango is. So if someone prays to Oya, they're asked that we be brought to the point of change, while prayers to Shango ask that we make the change. So we think of Shango in the way, because some of us are not learned enough, we make Shango a person rather than make Shango a concept that is symbolized by an image cast in the form of a person. So Shango, you always have to have Oya Shango. Oya is also a deity or an orisha when we look at the surface part of the system of Ifa. But then when you get into it, Oya represent what we all are going through in this room now, transformation, the process of change. But when you get to Shango, Shango represents the actual change having taken place. You see? So it is a philosophical perspective on the institution that we design to teach and transform our consciousness to become more aware of our ecological reality and our cosmological reality and the relationships between the two. I don't want to make that complicated because the bottom line, what I'm talking about is food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security. But you don't just arrive at food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security unless you have some organized methodologies and relationships that allow you to do this in a meaningful way that would allow you to come out success without being destructive after you've carried out the process. And so Dr. Jeffries has told us that there's three things that is essential for our movement, and that's economics, politics, and culture. The economics, as he says, is to your ecology, meaning how we utilize the things in the ecology to produce to produce for us those things that we've defined as being economics. And then politics, which is the management system of economics, is to psychology as economics is to ecology. That the politics, what we call politics, is how we have decided to manage what we are taking out of the ecology and calling wealth. But what determines how all these two work together and how the people in these work together is culture. Culture is the sociology. How you get your values, your belief, your role models, your attitudes, your mores. And culture means you must then have institutions that explains the nature of things political and that explain the nature of things economics. And so our culture always had a way of explaining itself. And what was so beautiful about Africa, when people said, well, it didn't have a standing army, it didn't have police forces because it didn't need it, because everything was divided into societies, sisterhoods and brotherhoods for everything, and everything policed itself. And that's a lecture to go into detail, but I want to go in detail about it. But as we begin to think about liberation more deeply, and as you who are here, mostly the activists, begin to act on liberation more deeply, then you have to look at not only those ideologies that we call ideologies, but those ideologies that we call religion, that forms how you view the world. And you've got to ask yourself if these ideologies allow you to view the world in a way that allows you to free yourself from white supremacy. And if these ideologies constantly rationalize relationships with white supremacy.